Before I tell you what I'm about to tell you, I need you to stay. I need you to not scroll past this. Because this story is not easy for me to share. It cost me everything. My title, my family, my future. And there were years I could not even say the name of Jesus out loud without my hands shaking. So if this is the kind of story you are willing to sit with, if you can give me that, then subscribe to this channel right now and stay until the end. Because by the time I finish, I think you will understand why I had to share it at all. Now let me take you back to the beginning. I was born into a world most people will never see. Not a house, not a home, a compound. Multiple buildings behind high walls, security at every gate, a private medical team on standby, drivers waiting at all hours, servants rotating in shifts so seamless that I never once had to notice the machinery of my own comfort. My name from the day I arrived into this world already carried weight I was too small to hold. Prince Hamza Al Saud, the Al Saud family, one of the wealthiest royal families in Saudi Arabia. I did not understand what that meant when I was young. I just knew that whatever I wanted appeared. Whatever I needed was already there before I thought to ask for it. There was a version of comfort in that world that goes beyond nice rooms and good food. It was a comfort of structure, of certainty, of knowing that you existed inside a system that had been built specifically to hold you, and that the system was not going anywhere. I grew up inside walls that were beautiful, marble floors that echoed underfoot, courtyards full of the sound of water, rooms that were larger than some people's entire homes. I did not know this was unusual. When something is the only world you have ever seen, it does not look unusual. It just looks like the world. I knew we had influence. I felt it in the way people's voices changed when they spoke to my father. It was subtle, a slight drop in pitch, a careful addition of respect at the edge of every sentence. I felt it in how quickly rooms cleared when he walked in, not because anyone was fleeing, because his arrival changed the weight of the air in a way that reorganized everyone instinctively. I felt it in how other children at certain events would look at me and then look away. Not because they disliked me, because I was not in the same category, and we all understood that without anyone saying it. My future had already been decided before I was born. Which school, which university, which role, which responsibilities I would carry into adulthood, which alliances our family would need me to represent, which rooms I would eventually stand in on behalf of the Al Saud name. Even who I would eventually marry was not something I would simply choose on my own. These things were understood. They were not said out loud most of the time. They did not need to be. I breathed them in like air from the first day I opened my eyes. There was my older brother, Prince Abdullah. He was the serious one, tall, composed, already carrying himself at 20 like a man who had been trained to hold power and did not find it uncomfortable. He was not cold exactly. He just had this quality of deciding how much of himself to give to any given moment, and always deciding less rather than more. I admired him. I also found him a little frightening, not because he was unkind, because he was so certain. My sister, Princess Samira, was sharp and careful. She knew exactly how to exist in our world, graceful enough not to draw criticism, intelligent enough to be taken seriously. She had a way of reading rooms that I have never seen matched. She could tell you within minutes of arriving somewhere who held power, who wanted it, who was afraid, and who was pretending. She used that knowledge carefully, never to wound, just to navigate. My brother Prince Faisal was somewhere in between. He had an easy way about him that the rest of us lacked. He could make anyone laugh. He could diffuse a tense moment with one perfectly chosen sentence. But underneath that ease, he was loyal to the family in a way that was bone deep, non-negotiable. If you had asked him to choose between what he thought was right and what the family needed, he would have struggled. But I think most of the time he would have chosen the family. Because for Faisal, the family was how he understood love. It was the container everything else fit inside. And then there was Noor, Princess Noor Al Saud, the youngest, 8 years old. She was small for her age, fine-boned. She had this way of looking at you that made you feel like she was actually listening, not just waiting for you to finish so she could say something back. There are not many people in the world who listen like that. Most of us are already forming our response while you are still speaking. Noor was not. She took things in, she held them, and then she said something that made you realize she had been thinking about it more carefully than anyone else in the room. She asked questions, constantly. Questions about everything. questions that nobody in our world had any patience for. She would ask things like, if God loves everyone, why are people afraid to ask him questions? The adults would laugh. They called it childish imagination. They called it the way children talk before they learn to be serious, before they learn which questions are acceptable and which ones you leave alone. I laughed too. But I want you to notice something. I laughed, and I remembered. Her questions stayed inside me, long after the room moved on to other conversations. Long after she had gone to bed and the palace was quiet again and the servants had dimmed the lights in the long corridors, I would find myself lying awake thinking about what she had asked. Not because I had an answer, because I realized I had never been allowed to ask questions like that at all. Not the questions themselves, the whole category of question, the kind that does not fit inside the system you were born into, and does not apologize for that. She was 8 years old, and she was asking the thing I had never been given permission to ask. I did not know yet what that meant. I was 18 when I left for London. I had studied in Saudi Arabia through my early years, and I was sharp enough academically that the family was proud to send me abroad. London meant the right university, the right connections, the right network for what my future was supposed to look like. There was a particular kind of pride in sending a son to study in England. Not because we admired everything about the West, because we understood that knowledge is a resource, and we were a family that knew how to turn resources into power. I arrived there ready to do what I had always done, perform well, represent the family, build the relationships that would matter later. I was disciplined, I was focused, I wore my name carefully, the way you wear something expensive, not showing off, just making sure you do not damage it. The city was enormous and loud and full of people who did not know who I was, which was its own strange kind of freedom. In Saudi Arabia, my name opened every door before I reached it. In London, I was just another student in a lecture hall. I liked it more than I expected to. The anonymity of it, the sense that I could sit in a room and just think, without my name arranging everything around me before I had a chance to form my own opinion. And then I met Dr. Jonathan Hayes. He was a lecturer, British, quiet in the way that some people are quiet, not because they have nothing to say, but because they are selective about when they speak. He was not flashy, he did not try to impress anyone. He wore the same jacket in different colors on rotating days, and drank the same kind of tea every time I saw him, and had the kind of mind that could hold enormous amounts of information without seeming to carry any weight at all. Like the knowledge had been integrated so completely that it was just part of him now, not something he was managing. We met at an academic seminar. He had been speaking about ancient historical texts and their reliability, how we evaluate the credibility of sources from 2,000 years ago, what standards of evidence historians actually use, what honest inquiry into the ancient world requires. I had asked a challenging question from the back of the room, a sharp one. I was testing him. I wanted to see what he would do with resistance. I expected him to dismiss it or give me a polished non-answer, the kind that sounds thorough but doesn't actually engage with what you asked. Instead, he stopped. He set his notes down. He thought for a moment in a way that was clearly real thinking, not performance. And then he said, "That is a genuinely good question. I would not insult you by answering it quickly." He invited me for tea the following week. That tea became a regular meeting. What I want you to understand about Jonathan is this. He never tried to convert me. He never debated me. He never laid out a row of arguments and then waited for me to crumble under them. He never made me feel like I was the project. He treated me like a thinker who was capable of following the evidence wherever it led, and he respected that enough to not try to lead me himself. He would listen to what I believed, really listen, and then ask me one question, just one. And the question was never designed to attack what I had said. It was designed to make me look more carefully at something I had already assumed I understood, something I had accepted without examining, because examining it had never felt necessary before. One afternoon he looked at me over his tea and said, "Have you ever actually read the historical accounts of Jesus yourself? Not what someone told you, they say. Not a summary, not a characterization. The accounts themselves?" I told him that was not something I had done. He nodded slowly. He did not seem surprised. He said, "You might find it interesting." That was all. He did not press. He did not bring it up the next week. He trusted me enough to leave the door open and let me decide whether to walk through it. Some people would have seen that restraint as indifference. I understood it as the opposite. He respected me too much to push. I walked through it. I found a Bible. I did not buy one. That felt like too much of a statement, too committed, too visible. I borrowed one from a university library and told myself I was doing academic research, historical research. The kind of rigorous, dispassionate thing a serious student would do. I was not looking for anything. I was simply being thorough. I read the Gospels with the same mind I would bring to any historical document, carefully, critically. I compared what I read to what I knew from other ancient sources. I looked for internal contradictions. I looked for the patterns that appear in mythology, the embellishment, the backward constructed legend, the too neat hero's journey. I was looking for the places where the story would fall apart under honest examination, but the story did not fall apart. What I found instead was a figure who made me uncomfortable in a way I did not know how to name. Jesus spoke differently than any teacher I had read. He did not speak like someone explaining a system. He did not speak like someone building a case, laying out principles, constructing an argument. He spoke like someone who already knew what was true and was choosing, in each moment, what to do with you, with the specific person in front of him. He was not addressing audiences. He was addressing people, one at a time, even in crowds. He touched people nobody else would touch. He stopped for people everybody else had already written off. He answered the most loaded questions, questions designed to trap him, to expose him, to make him choose between two equally dangerous options, with stories that somehow held more weight than any direct answer could have. I kept reading. I read quietly. That night, in my room with the door closed. Not because I told myself I was doing something wrong. I tried hard not to tell myself that. But because I knew with complete certainty that if anyone in my family found out, the conversation would be over before it began. The book would be taken. The questions would be shut down. I would be managed back into the shape I was supposed to hold. So I read alone, night after night. What I did not know was that someone had already noticed I was changing. She was 8 years old. When I came home from London for my first holiday break, Noor found me within an hour of my arrival. She had this way of appearing at your side without you seeing her come. One moment you were alone, and then she was simply there, sitting next to you, looking up at you with that expression she had, the one that told you she had been waiting. She asked, "What have you been learning?" I paused. I told her I had been studying history, philosophy, the usual. She looked at me the way a child looks at you when they know you are being careful, but they are going to give you the space to be careful. She nodded. Then she asked, "Have you been reading about Jesus?" I looked at her, 8 years old, sitting beside me in the palace garden in her dress and her small gold earrings, looking up at me with a question she had no idea was the most dangerous thing anyone had asked me since I arrived in London. I told her, a little. She got very still, not tense, just quiet and focused in the way she got when something mattered to her. She asked me what I thought of him. I told her honestly. I said I was not sure yet. She thought about that. Then she asked, "Do you think he really talked to children?" I told her I honestly did not know. She smiled, not a big smile, just a small, certain one. She said, "I think he still does." I had no response to that. The adults, when they heard us talking later, found it sweet. Noor and her questions, they said. Always Noor. They moved on to other conversations. But I watched her walk away through the garden and I thought, she is not imagining things. Something is happening inside that child. Something I cannot name yet, but I can see it. The months passed. I went back to London. I continued my studies. I continued meeting with Jonathan. I continued reading. I was careful. I was methodical. I was not yet asking myself if I believed anything. I was just reading, just investigating, just doing what any honest person does when they are looking at something and trying to understand it. But the honesty was starting to cost me, because the more I read, the more I noticed a gap between what I had been told all my life about what the Bible said and what the Bible actually said, between what I had been told about who Jesus was and what the accounts of Jesus actually showed. I was not ready to say what I thought that meant, but I knew the gap was there, and I could not unknow it. Several months later, I received a call from the palace. Noor was ill. The details were uncertain at first. The doctors were still assessing, but the word they kept using was serious, and in a family like mine, serious from a doctor meant something very specific. It meant all other priorities stop. It meant come home. I went home. I walked into the palace and felt the change in the air immediately. It was not one thing, it was everything at once. The servants moved differently, more careful, more deliberate, like people who had been reminded that the ground can shift. The spaces that were usually filled with the noise of a large household operating at full capacity were quieter than I had ever heard them. Even the sound of the air felt different, heavier. My mother's eyes, when she looked at me, held something I had never seen there before. My mother was a woman who had been trained her entire life not to show fear. She showed it now, not dramatically, just at the edges. In the way she held herself, in the pause before she spoke. I went to Noor's room. She was small before. She looked smaller now. Smaller and somehow also more still than a child that age should be still. There were medical monitors. There were soft lights kept low for her comfort. There were adults who kept coming in and going out with quiet purpose, and every one of them moved the way people move when they are trying not to disturb something fragile. But here is what I was not prepared for. She was not frightened. She was not crying. She was not restless with the particular agitation that sick children often have, that trapped and uncomfortable quality that makes you hurt for them just watching. She lay in her bed in the middle of all of our hovering, all of our fear and our worry and the prayers we were sending up in desperation, and she was peaceful. Not the peace of someone who does not understand the situation. Deeper than that. A peace that seemed to come from somewhere outside herself, like something was resting inside her that our worry couldn't touch. I sat with her. I kept coming back to sit with her throughout those first days. The whole family prayed. I want to be honest about this. The prayers in that palace during those days were not ritual. They were not habit. They were real. They came from real fear and real love for that small person in that bed. When you are afraid you are going to lose someone that small, something strips away. All the composure, all the training, all the ways you have been taught to manage how you appear. It just goes. And what is left is raw. The prayers were real. I do not say that to minimize them. They were as real as anything I have ever witnessed. But Noor was peaceful before any of us began praying. One evening, I believe it was the third or fourth night, I was sitting with her after most of the family had gone to rest. It was late. The room was dim. The monitors were soft and steady. The palace outside the door was quiet. It was just me and her, and the sound of her breathing. She opened her eyes. She looked at me with those eyes of hers, the ones that had always made you feel like she was looking at something more than just your face, like she was taking in something you weren't fully aware of. She said quietly, "A man in white sat beside my bed." I went absolutely still. She said it again, the same words, the same calm tone, not groggy, not confused, not drifting between sleep and waking, fully, clearly awake. She described him, not as frightening, not bright or overwhelming or dramatic the way you might imagine a supernatural encounter to be. She said he was kind, just completely, entirely, simply kind. She paused, trying to find the right word for it, and then she said it was like the kindness was the main thing about him, not something he was doing, something he was. She said it came off of him the way warmth comes off of something very gently heated, present, steady, impossible to mistake. She did not seem afraid telling me this. She seemed like someone describing something they had seen with their own eyes, that they knew was real and were being careful to get right. And she said he had told her something. She said, "He told me to tell my family not to be afraid." He said he has not forgotten this house. I did not breathe. The room felt very small. She looked at me after she said it. She watched my face the way a child watches you when they have said something important and they are waiting to see how you will receive it. Just attentive. I did not know what to say. I reached out and I held her hand and I sat there with her in the quiet until her eyes closed and her breathing slowed and she was asleep. I sat there a while longer after that. The next morning I told my mother what Noor had said. My mother listened with her hands folded in her lap. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said Noor must have been dreaming. She said the medication could cause that in children sometimes. She said it gently, not dismissively. She was looking for somewhere to put it that made sense. When I mentioned it to the palace doctor on his next visit, he nodded and made a note. He said that fever and certain medications produced vivid perceptual experiences in young patients, and that it was not medically unusual. He used the word hallucination. He was not unkind about it. He was just placing it in a category where it would not require further examination. When one of the royal advisors heard about it, because servants talk, and information moves through a palace faster and more completely than most people understand, he came to me privately. He told me that kind of talk needed to stop. He was not angry, he was precise. He said children said things when they were unwell, and that attaching meaning to those things was not something we were going to do. It was settled. The topic was closed. Life moved on. Or it appeared to. But Noor moved on differently. She recovered. Slowly. And as she recovered, something had clearly settled inside her that had not been there before. She talked about Jesus the way you talk about someone you know, not the way you would talk about a figure from a story. Not with performance or drama, just casually, naturally. The way you mention the name of a friend, she would say things like, Jesus was kind to sick people. I like that about him. Or she would ask questions at the dinner table that were not arguments. She was not trying to win anything. She was not trying to change anyone's mind. She would just say something, quiet, specific, curious, and then listen to the reaction and absorb it and move on. The family noticed something was different about her, not her theology. Nobody took her theology seriously. She was 9 years old, but her character, the way she responded to things, the way she treated the servants, the way she forgave when she had reason not to, the way she chose kindness in moments when irritation would have been completely understandable. You cannot fake that in a child. Children show you who they are all the time because they have not learned to hide yet, and Noor was showing us something that none of us could explain. I want to tell you what happened when it all came apart. I had been careful. For years, I had been so careful. But something about watching Noor change, something about the months of reading and the conversations with Jonathan, and the gap that would not close no matter how I tried to reason around it, something was shifting in me in ways I did not know how to stop. I started to pray differently. Not pray in the way I had been taught. Pray in a way that felt more like talking, more like honesty. I would sit in my room in London and speak into the silence and say things like, if this is true, I need to know. I cannot keep standing at the edge of this. Show me. I don't know exactly when the shift happened. It was not one moment. It was more like a slow thaw. A gradual loosening of something that had been locked for a very long time, and somewhere in there, I stopped fighting it. I started to believe. I did not announce it. I did not write it down anywhere. I did not tell Jonathan immediately, or Noor, or anyone. I just held it quietly inside me like something fragile I was still figuring out how to carry. But the secret did not stay secret. I do not know exactly how it happened. I do not know who saw something or said something to someone else, or what specifically broke the surface. Secrets in a palace are strange things. The walls are high and the gates are guarded, but information still moves. People see things. People talk to other people. And certain kinds of changes in a person, real changes, the kind that reach all the way down, are not as invisible as you think they are. One day I returned home from London for a visit, and the moment I walked through the door, I could feel that something had changed. It was in the way the servants looked at me, too careful, too avoidant, not cold, nothing that obvious, just slightly too much effort going into not meeting my eyes. It was in the way my brother Abdullah came to find me within minutes of my arrival, not with warmth, with purpose. He was standing in the entrance hall when I came in, and he looked at me with an expression I had never seen him direct at me before. Something between disappointment and decision, like he had already decided something and was simply arriving to carry it out. He said, "Come with me." I followed him. He took me to my father's office, the office where my father met with advisors, where strategy was discussed, where decisions were made that affected hundreds of lives and billions in holdings, a room that was always about something serious. My father was there, my mother was there, Abdullah behind me now, Faisal standing to the side, Samira near the window, 5 people, all of whom I had known my entire life. All of whom I loved, all standing together in a way that told me before a single word was spoken that this was not a conversation, this was something else. The room was completely still when I walked in. My father looked at me the way I had seen him look at things that had failed him, not in open anger. In something colder and more controlled than anger, a kind of assessment. He was measuring what I was now and deciding what to do with it. He said, "You have been reading the Christian Bible." It was not a question. I stood there and felt the weight of every person in that room at once. My entire life was in that room. Every relationship I had, every future I had been told was mine, every bond I had built and taken for granted since before I was old enough to understand what bonds were. My title was in that room. My inheritance was in that room. My name, the name that had opened every door I had ever walked through, was in that room. I said, yes. The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds. Then my father spoke. I will not give you his exact words. They are not mine to repeat in full. But I will tell you what he said to me. He told me I had shamed generations of our family, not just the living ones, the ones who came before, the ones whose faith had been one of the foundations of everything we had built and everything we were. He said I had taken that foundation and treated it as something disposable. He said it in a controlled voice. The controlled voice was worse than anger would have been. My brother Abdullah spoke next. He said I was not the person they had prepared him to stand beside. He said it like a fact, not like an accusation, like a simple, sad conclusion he had already arrived at before this meeting. Faisal said nothing. He stood with his eyes on the floor. I watched him because he was the one I thought might break. He did not break, but he did not speak either. His silence said something. Samira looked at me like I had become someone she did not recognize. Not with anger, with something more like grief. Like she was looking at the place where her brother used to stand and finding a stranger there. My mother wept, not loudly, not with any kind of drama. She wept the way a person weeps when they have been trying not to, and have simply reached the point where they can no longer manage it. Quietly, with her hands folded in her lap. Her face turned slightly away, not because she was hiding it, because she was trying to give it to herself privately. It was worse than if she had yelled at me. I do not have language for what those minutes felt like. I was stripped of my responsibilities within the family's public affairs that same week. I was told my name would no longer appear in succession planning. I was asked to go. Not that night, they said, but soon. And I should understand, clearly and permanently, that my position here had changed in a way that would not be reversed. The friends disappeared quickly, faster than I expected. Not all of them, but most. The acquaintances who had treated me warmly at events, the people who called on holidays, who sought me out, who made me feel part of a larger network, became unreachable, one by one, without explanations. They did not need to explain. I understood. My name stopped appearing in conversations I had once been central to. The compound I had grown up in, the walls I knew, the marble floors, the sound of the water in the courtyards, began to feel like a place I was already gone from, even while I was still standing inside it. I packed carefully. I was methodical about it because methodical was what I had. Emotion was a luxury I could not afford in those days. I packed what I needed. I left what I did not. The night before I left, Noor found me. She appeared in the hallway outside my room the way she always appeared. Without warning, just suddenly there. She was 10 years old, still small, still with those quiet, careful eyes. She did not ask questions this time. She walked up to me, and she wrapped both arms around my waist, and she held on. Small arms, fierce grip, the kind of grip that says what words are not big enough to say. Then she pulled back. She looked up at me, and she whispered, "He told me you wouldn't be alone." I looked at her for a long moment. I did not ask her what she meant. I already knew. I left. I built a smaller life, quieter, without the weight of a title in front of my name, without a compound and a staff and a family network that solved every problem before it arrived. Just me and the handful of things I had carried out with me and the belief I had started to hold and was now deciding to keep no matter what it cost. It cost a great deal. There are no words I can give you for that period that will do it justice. Loneliness that is not just the absence of people, but the absence of an entire identity. The feeling of reaching for something familiar and finding nothing. The confusion of grief for people who were still alive, people who had simply decided you were no longer available to them. I questioned everything. Not my belief in Jesus, that was the one thing that did not shake, but everything else. Why this? Why now? Why this family? Why this cost? Why this path for this specific life? I ended up in Jordan. I don't fully know how to explain why Jordan. It felt like somewhere between everything. Not home. That word had stopped meaning what it used to mean. Not London, which had become the place where I had quietly dismantled a life. Not any future I had once imagined, because that future no longer existed and I had not yet built a new one. Jordan felt like ground, like somewhere I could put my feet and feel the earth beneath me and not be required to be anything in particular. I was traveling through the desert outside Amman. alone. The road went through stretches of landscape that were vast and empty in a way that city people do not always understand. Not empty like abandoned, but empty like undisturbed. Like it had been this way for a very long time and had no opinion about what happened to you while you stood inside it. I stopped the car at a point where the road curved and there was a wide flat space to the side and nothing moving in any direction as far as I could see. I got out. I started walking. Not toward anything. Not with a plan. I walked because I needed to feel the ground under my feet and the dry heat on my skin and the wind. It was slight, barely there, touching my face. I needed something physical and real that was not inside my own head, because inside my own head it was very loud and very dark and I could not find the quiet. I walked until I was tired. I sat down in the sand. The sky above me was enormous. The kind of enormous you forget exists when you spend your life in cities and buildings. Clear all the way to its edges, deep and still. The light was starting to change. Not yet evening, but past the height of afternoon. That specific quality of desert light that makes everything look like it has been cut out of something. I was not praying. I was not thinking clearly. I was just sitting there with the wreckage of the last several months spread out inside me like a room that had been turned upside down. I had made the choice I believed was right. I had held to something real. And I had lost. I named the losses one by one sitting there in the sand. My title, my role, my succession, my father's respect, my brother's regard, my mother's peace, my network, my name, as it had functioned in the world. Both things were true at the same time. The rightness and the loss. And I was sitting in the middle of both of them and they were both pressing in and I had no way to make either one stop. And then something changed in the air. I do not know how else to describe it. The temperature did not change. The wind did not change. Nothing around me moved, but the quality of the air changed in a way that was as clear and specific as a change in sound, when something that was playing stops, and the silence that follows is not the same as the silence before. Like the space around me was no longer empty. My chest tightened, not from fear, from something I had no category for, something that moved through me the way a very deep sound moves through a building, not heard exactly, felt, in the structure of the thing. My hands, resting in my lap, went still. I looked up. He was there. I am not going to try to dress this in language that makes it sound more dramatic than it was, because the truth is it was not dramatic in the way you would expect. It was not blinding light. It was not thunder. It was not anything that overwhelming. It was the opposite of overwhelming. It was the most precise, specific, quiet, present thing I have ever experienced in my life. Like everything that had ever felt theoretical or distant or merely possible had become, simply, completely, without any doubt, real. I knew who it was. I knew immediately. I did not question it for a single moment. There was no part of my mind that said, this is something else, this is exhaustion, this is grief making shapes in the air. That part of me was silent, because whatever was standing there was not a question, it was an answer, and my whole body knew the difference. My hands started to tremble first, then my arms. Not violent trembling, not panic, just the kind of trembling that happens when something far too large for your body is moving through you, and your body is doing its best to hold it. Like a wire carrying more current than it was designed for, vibrating just slightly with the effort. My eyes burned, my throat closed completely. I could not have spoken if I had wanted to. He looked at me, and I want you to understand something about that, being looked at by him. It was not inspection, it was not judgment, it was something I had spent my entire life not knowing was possible. To be completely, entirely, fully known, not the version of you that you present, not the version that carries a title or performs a role or manages how they appear, but the real interior of you, every wound and failure and fear and question, and to be met there with nothing other than, acceptance is not the right word, steadiness, a complete and unshakable steadiness that said, yes, I see all of it, and I am here. I could not hold it. I just could not hold it. He said, you fear losing the family you can see. Pause. But I have been preparing a family you cannot yet imagine. 14 words. That was all. But those 14 words did something that nothing else had been able to do in the months of grief and loss and questioning and sitting alone in the dark with everything I had given up. They landed exactly. Not generally, not broadly, not in the way that a comforting phrase lands when someone says something kind that is meant for anyone in pain. These words were for the exact wound I carried. the specific fear that had lived in my chest since the moment my family turned away from me in that room. The terror that I had chosen something true and lost everything real. He had not addressed the theology of it. He had not explained the plan. He had simply named what was breaking me and told me the truth about what was coming. The trembling in my body slowed. Something inside me that had been locked, not just locked, anchored, sealed, placed under pressure for my entire life, came loose. I wept. I am telling you this plainly. I sat in the desert of Jordan, and I wept. Not quietly, not with any composure, not the manageable kind of tears that you can contain. Everything came out of me that had been too heavy to carry alone, and had been sitting in my chest and my throat and behind my eyes for longer than I had known. He did not say more. He did not explain. He did not give me a plan or a timeline or a theological framework or instructions for the future. He was simply there, and I want you to hold that. The simple fact of his presence was more than anything he could have said, because for the first time in my life I was not alone with the weight of the truest thing about me. Someone knew it entirely, and was not leaving. When the moment passed, I cannot tell you how long it was. Time was not working normally. I was still sitting in the desert. Same sand, same sky, same light. The wind had not changed, but I was different. Not because my family had come back. They had not. Not because the pain was gone. It was not gone. Not because the future had been arranged into a neat shape I could understand. I was different because for the first time in my life, I was not afraid of any of it. And I knew him. Not facts about him, not arguments for him, not a position I had argued my way into. Him, the real person, present in the desert, present with me. I sat there for a long time after. There was nowhere I needed to be, and for the first time in a very long time, I did not need to be anywhere else either. I began to rebuild, slowly, without a blueprint. Without the scaffolding of a family title and a predetermined path, I made decisions one at a time. I found work that used my mind. I found a community of people who knew what it was to carry a faith that cost them something, and who did not make it into performance. I started to breathe again, and then news began reaching me from home. Not through my father, not through Abdullah, through smaller channels. People who still carried some thread of connection to me and chose to let it stay. What I heard was this. Noor was still talking about Jesus. Not dramatically, not standing on anything or preaching to anyone, just the way she always had. Answering questions when people asked, describing what she believed the way you would describe something you had seen with your own eyes. The servants in the palace had started to notice, not one or two, many. They would see Noor in the halls or at meals or in the garden, and they would ask her questions. Not to challenge her, because they were curious. Because something about her patience, her willingness to sit with people's pain, her complete absence of the kind of pride you expect from someone in her position, made her approachable in a way that no one expected from a member of the royal family. Some of them started reading, on their own, quietly, in the small hours when their shifts ended. The security staff started listening more carefully to her conversations at dinner. Palace employees who had worked for the family for years began having conversations among themselves that they had never had before. None of this was because of me. None of this was because anyone had been argued into anything. It was because of a child who had sat beside a sickbed and come back from it carrying something real, and who had never tried to hold it over anyone or use it for anything, who just was it, every day, in every room. Family members began to quietly seek out more information, not openly, not in ways anyone would announce, but the questions multiplied. The curiosity that Noor's life had planted kept growing in soil that nobody was deliberately tending. My mother was one of the first. She did not contact me right away. Months passed, nearly a year, and then one day I received a message from her, brief, careful. She said she wanted to speak with me. We spoke. She did not tell me she had made a decision yet. She told me she had been watching Noor. She said, "I have watched that child every day for 2 years, Hamza. And I cannot explain what I see in her. I cannot explain it from anywhere I have been taught to look." She asked me questions. I answered them honestly, not trying to convince her, not performing anything, just telling her what I had found and what I had experienced, and letting her hold it the way she needed to. My mother arrived at her own faith in her own time. It was not my moment. It was hers. Abdullah came later, much later. I did not expect it. If you had asked me in that office when my father looked at me with that cold assessment, if you had asked me then whether Abdullah would ever walk this road, I would have told you no, not him. He is too sealed, too decided, too much the person this family made him to be. But Noor had not given up on him. She simply kept living the way she lived, in his presence, without pressure, without agenda, and something in him, eventually, broke open. His story is his to tell. But he told me, when we finally spoke again, I could not keep arguing with what I saw in her. I had run out of explanations. Today our family gatherings look nothing like they once did. I want to be honest with you about that. I want to be precise. Not everyone made the same decision. My father did not. Some relationships have not been repaired. Some may never be. There are people who were in that office the day I was removed who do not speak to me now. Not from hatred. Some of them, I think, from something more like grief. Like they are mourning a version of me they expected and cannot get past its absence. I do not carry bitterness toward them. That is not something I manufactured. It is something that was taken out of me the day I sat in the desert and he was there. Those of us who encountered Jesus, and I use that word carefully, encountered, because it was not a decision made easily or quickly by anyone, we have no bitterness. I do not fully understand why that is. I just know it to be true. We have quietly used the resources we have access to for humanitarian work across the Middle East. Education, orphan care, trauma recovery. We do not put our names on these things. We do not need the credit. We just need the work to happen. When people ask me what changed my family, and some people do ask, because change visible enough is hard to hide, they expect me to say something about the desert, about my encounter, about the moment Jesus appeared to me in the sand and heat and said the thing that stopped my bleeding. And I do not minimize that. That moment is the center of my life. But when I am being precise, when I am telling the complete truth, I tell them about Noor, about an 8-year-old girl who asked questions nobody wanted to answer, about a 10-year-old who whispered a promise to me in a hallway that she had no human way of knowing, about a child who lay in a sickbed and came back from it carrying something none of us could account for, about a girl who never once preached, never argued, never positioned herself as anything other than exactly what she was, a child who knew someone and lived accordingly. The debates did not move our family. The arguments did not move our family. The sermons and the theological frameworks and the intellectual defenses did not move our family. A child moved our family. Not by trying to, just by being. I think about what she said that afternoon in the garden when she was 8 years old. I think he still does. She was talking about whether Jesus talked to children. And she was right. He still does. And the children he talks to, the ones who carry what they have encountered without using it as a weapon, those children become bridges that no debate in the world could have built. If you have stayed here until the end, I want to say something to you directly. I do not know what you came into this video carrying. I do not know if you are in a palace or a small apartment or somewhere in between. I do not know if your family is the kind that would understand a story like mine or the kind that would close the door the same way my family closed it. But I know this. This story is not here because I wanted to perform something. It is here because I spent too many years holding it alone, and I believe that somewhere out there is someone for whom this is not just a story. Someone for whom this is information they needed before they could take the next step. If that is you, I hope you take the step. And if this channel holds something for you, stories like this one, told honestly, by people who paid real prices for what they found, then subscribe. Stay. There are other stories here, other lives that were changed in ways nobody planned. I think you might need some of them, and I think Noor would be glad to know you stayed.